Ladies and gentlemen, good afternoon. As you've heard, I'm James Garner. I'm the Chief Executive Officer of Kazia Therapeutics. And it's terrific to be able to mark the beginning of the second quarter of 2022 here today on Share Cafe's Hidden Gems series. This is a really exciting period for our company, and I want to talk about some of what we're doing. You can jump ahead 2 slides, please. Just to begin by orientating everybody to Kazia, I know it might be a familiar name to some people on the webinar today and a new name to others. We are an oncology drug development company. We work in the business of developing new cancer therapies. And we have 2 drugs in our pipeline. Our lead drug, as you can see on the left-hand side of the slide here, paxalosib, that's currently in a phase 3 human trial for brain cancer, and particularly for a disease called Glioblastoma, which we'll say more in a moment. Now, those who are familiar with biotech companies will recall that there are 3 phases in the human testing of new drugs. So a drug that is in phase 3 is near the end of the process, and we're expecting final data from that study next year, calendar 2023. So we're really getting to the business end of things here. We do have a second drug in our pipeline, EVT-801, in the middle of the slide. I won't talk about it too much today. It is in phase 1 human testing, but this is something that really sets our company apart from many companies our size. We have 2 genuinely different drugs in our pipeline, gives us a real degree of diversification, which many single asset companies lack. Moving on to the next slide, please. Just to give a little flavor of glioblastoma, which is the disease we're primarily trying to treat with our lead drug. This is one of the most aggressive cancers known to modern medicine. It's a disease that can affect anybody at any point in their life. There's about 130,000 cases a year worldwide. And with best available treatment, the average survival from diagnosis is about 15 months. And unfortunately, that figure really has not improved this century. And as you can see from some of the characters down at the bottom of the slide here, this is a disease that can really affect anybody at any stage. And although it's not as common as lung cancer or breast cancer or bowel cancer, this is still conservatively about a $1.5 billion US annual market. So very significant commercial opportunity for a company like ours. Next slide, please. We currently treat glioblastoma like this, and this is how it works just about every country in the world. We try to remove as much of the tumor as possible surgically. We then give these patients radiotherapy, and we then treat them with a drug called temozolomide. Temozolomide's a real old school chemotherapy drug. It's a pretty tough drug for patients to take. It's been around for 20-something years and now off patent, and just about everybody makes it. It's the only FDA-approved drug treatment for newly diagnosed patients. Trouble with temozolomide is it only works for 1 out of every 3 patients. And for those 1/3 of patients, it provides some benefit, but for the remaining 2/3, the drug is essentially useless. And those are the patients we're really targeting with paxalosib. Next slide, please. Now, paxalosib is part of a class of drugs called PI3K inhibitors. The reason I bring that up is because there are 5 FDA-approved PI3K inhibitors already on the market. So this is a really well-tested, well-proven way of treating cancer. The unique thing about paxalosib is it's the only one of these drugs that can cross the so-called blood-brain barrier. It's the only drug that can get into the brain. And if you're treating brain cancer, that's a must. So none of these other drugs are ever going to be treatments for brain cancer. But paxalosib has this unique advantage here, which really sets it apart from anything else in the global pipeline. Next slide, please. And the good news is we've got solid clinical data to suggest that the drug works. This is the high-level data from a phase 2 study that we completed at the end of last year. The light blue bars show paxalosib. We're looking at 2 measures here: progression-free survival, a measure of the ability of the drug to delay growth of the tumor; overall survival, a measure of the ability of the drug to extend life. And as you can see, there is several months of advantage here compared to temozolomide. Now, that may not sound like a lot, but in a disease like glioblastoma, several months is everything. Sadly, very, very few cancer drugs cure the disease they're treating. Best way we have to cure cancer is still to cut it out in most cases. But we've got market research data that we've put out in the public domain showing that even a couple of months of survival benefit here translates to an extraordinary market uptake, 80 to 90% penetration here. So really anything that moves the needle for these patients, even a little bit, is likely to be a very successful commercial product. So we've been very, very heartened by this data. I think this really looks extremely encouraging in the context of this very, very treatment-resistant disease. Next slide, please. So we're in phase 3, and that's the top arrow in this slide. Here, as you can see, glioblastoma in phase 3. But we also have a huge amount of other work going on with this drug. As you can see from the rest of the slide, we have work going on human trials in 3 other forms of brain cancer. DIPG, a rare childhood brain cancer, horrible disease, no FDA-approved drugs. Primary CNS lymphoma, another form of brain cancer, and brain metastases, which is cancer that has spread to the brain from elsewhere in the body. And so really there's an extraordinarily diverse program of work going on here with paclitaxel. And as you can see on the right, we're working with some of the absolute best in the business. Hospitals like Memorial Sloan Kettering Cancer Center, Dana-Farber Cancer Institute, those are 2 of the top 5 cancer hospitals in the world. St. Jude Children's Research Hospital in Memphis, Tennessee, arguably one of the top children's cancer hospitals in the world. Some absolutely A-grade collaborators that are supporting the program here, not just by working on the trials, but also in many cases by co-funding some of this work. So really broad program with absolutely first-class partners. Next slide, please. Just a couple of slides on Kazia as a business. We are actually a super lean virtual company. Our board is shown on the right, just 3 non-exec directors and myself. Our management team on the right of the slide here, 2 of us based in Australia, 2 in the United States. That really just reflects the weighting of our market and a lot of our trial activity. But we do have wrapped up in this relatively small number of people, an incredible depth of experience in international drug development. And so we really punch above our weight in terms of our resources, and about 80 cents out of every dollar we spend goes directly into our clinical trial activity. We don't run a huge head office and all those expensive indulgences. We spend our money on drug development. Next slide, please. And here's just a snapshot of our financials. This is 2021 shown on the left as our share price. We'll update this now for first quarter of this year in due course. Look, to be candid, it's been a shocking start to the year for the entire biotech sector. But we're really quite comfortable here because at the end of the day, our market opportunity is driven by the patients who get our disease and how well our drugs work. None of those things have changed. And so we're really hoping and expecting for the biotech sector to bounce back in the second quarter. And we're in a good position to leverage that when it does. We have, as you can see here, some cash at bank that sees us through to fourth quarter of this year, and some really good quality, fundamentally driven investors on our register that have been incredibly supportive to the company over several rounds of financing over the last 3 or 4 years. Next slide, please. And finally, companies like ours live and die by the catalysts that we can deliver. And this is a very busy year for our company. Been a quiet start to the year, just frankly, because it's been an adverse market for biotech companies. But as we head now into the second quarter, there is an awful lot happening. We expect to be opening our phase 3 study in Europe and China over the coming months. It's already running in the United States and Canada. So this expansion will really give us access to a much broader pool of patients. It's recruiting gangbusters already, but I think this should really pick up the pace. And then cut a long story short, lots and lots of data through 2022. Many of the studies that we're running will be reporting interim or in some cases final data. And this starts as soon as next week. We'll be attending the American Association of Cancer Research annual meeting. It's in New Orleans, Louisiana this year. First time it's in person for 3 years. And we do have several abstracts for both of our drugs that have been accepted there, as we've said publicly. So starting next week, we're going to be sharing new data from our pipeline. And I think that's really going to kick off, hopefully, a very, very busy second quarter for the company. So, ladies and gentlemen, thank you so much for the attention. As I say, an exciting time for the company. I'd be delighted to address any questions that come up.
James, thanks. A great presentation as always, and definitely you love an MD who's excited about not just the company they work for, but the progress that company is making. An astute attendee to the webinar has asked the question, you've recently been to the US. What was the mood temperature from investors over there, and what were the common questions investors were asking?
Yeah, look, it's fair to say this has been a tough start to the year. As one of the attendees has said, I was in the US just a couple of weeks ago. One of the analysts I met told me it was the worst start to a year he had ever seen in his career, and he's not new to Wall Street. We've got about 150 odd NASDAQ listed biotech companies right now that are trading at less than cash backing, which is really, really unusual. So it's been tough, and in fact, Kazia has in many ways got off lightly compared to many companies in the sector. There are companies that are down 80% off their highs. I think a couple of things really stand out for us. We were never overvalued in the first place. I think I would argue perhaps to the contrary. And so I think, that really helps. A number of investors point out that late stage companies like ours are really in a strong position here. We could be going to the FDA looking for a marketing authorization within the next 18 to 24 months. And that's very imminent for a biotech investor. So we're in a very, very different position from those companies that are still in the lab or still in very early stage trials. And finally, I think the quality of the work really stands out here. The kinds of hospitals that we're collaborating with, the rigor of our trial design, the quality of the data that's likely to come out of that. All these things really speak to investors. And I think as we move into the second quarter, I think everybody's hoping for a rebound in biotech, but it will be the quality companies that I think are favored there. And I think we really want to try and position ourselves to ride that wave.
A question here around the number of brain cancer sufferers. Is that up relative to cancer sufferers, sort of more general numbers?
Yes, sad to say, brain cancer and glioblastoma in particular is getting more common. And nobody exactly knows why. It may be that we're getting better at diagnosing it. The people have suggested everything from how often we fly in airplanes to cell phone usage to you name it. Nobody exactly knows because we don't really understand the causes of this disease fantastically well. But yes, this disease is getting more common. And unlike most cancers, the prognosis isn't getting better. So if we look at breast cancer, about 90% of breast cancer patients will survive at least 5 years after diagnosis, more than 5 years after diagnosis. With prostate cancer, we've got really very good at treating that for most patients, such that people even say now that patients are more likely to die with prostate cancer than from prostate cancer. But we haven't made any real progress in brain cancer. So this is a growing problem. It's something that we, as an industry and as a medical establishment, we really need to turn our minds to.
And in terms of the coronavirus or COVID-19, has that had any impact on recruitment, or because of the importance of the clinical intervention and the work that you're doing, that you've been able to sort of navigate your way through it?
It's been mostly the latter. These are patients that can't wait. They can't be told to just sort of go home and come back in 3 months. Somehow their care has to continue. And so generally these kinds of patients are the last to be compromised in something like the current pandemic. There's no doubt with a couple of our trials in a couple of our centers, a couple of our hospitals, it's had a temporary impact. It's maybe there's a study here and there where it's delayed us by a few months here and a few months there. Our phase 3 study in glioblastoma has really not been touched. That's been racing ahead. Some of these studies in areas like brain metastases, it's maybe slowed them down by a few months, but by and large, the impact has not been substantial. And of course, we're really grateful for that.
Last question, and quite an interesting one. The long-term plans, is it license? Is it takeover? Is it distribution? Enter a distribution agreement, do it yourself, or are you just keeping all the options open?
Look, I think we're really trying to keep all options open here. We've got exactly 2 objectives for Paxalis. One is that we really think this drug offers something to patients. We want to make sure that patients get access to it everywhere in the world. And second, we want to return value to our shareholders. And anything that helps us do those 2 things, we're going to welcome. We actually already licensed the China rights to this drug to one of China's leading pharmaceuticals last year. We got $11 million in the upfront payment, up to $281 million in milestones and high teen royalties on that deal. One of the better oncology partnering deals ever done in China, if I may say so. So China, we've already taken the licensing route. We've kept other territories open just because we think this is going to be a much, much more valuable drug with phase 3 data. But we're always having those discussions, both internally and with potential partners. And I think at the moment, we're just keeping all our options open.
A company keeping all its options open with plenty of news flow and moving right into really important stages of your drug development. James, thanks for a great presentation.
Thanks so much, David.